大家好，感谢关注江江 Victoria。在这里，如果你对中文感兴趣，想了解中国文化，又想知道在中国的日常生活是什么样子的话，那么请跟我一起学习中文，了解中国文化吧。
Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Victoria. Recently, there was a Chinese animated movie which has achieved great popularity in China called Chang'an. Maybe some of you have known it on the internet or have watched it in the cinema. It really reflects the Tang Dynasty, one of the most prosperous dynasties in Chinese history. In the Tang Dynasty, at that time, in terms of the politics, economy, culture, and diplomacy, all of them reached a highlight moment in the Chinese history, especially for the Tang poetry. Large numbers of poets emerged. So today, let's talk about those classical Chinese poetry. Hope that you will have a concept of the Chinese poetry in today's video. Let's see it. First of all, the Chinese poetry is one of the earliest as well as the most fully developed literary genre in China. It derived from the work songs and the ballads during the prehistoric times, long before the emergence of the written texts. The Book of Songs, in Chinese, 诗经, is the first poem collection including 305 poems from the early Western Zhou dynasties to the Middle Spring and Autumn period. Chinese poetry originated from the two major starting points. One is the Book of Songs, the realistic source, and the other is 楚辞, the romantic source. Both can be dated back to the pre-Qin period. Classical Chinese poetry is a general term which includes, in terms of the temperament, perhaps the first and foremost 诗 or poem, a literary genre that reflects life and expresses emotion through rhythmic patterns of the language. In simple terms, the earliest Chinese poems have melodies in them. Poems can be subdivided into two types: archaic poems, 古体诗, or pre-Tang poetry, 前唐诗, and modern poems, 近体诗, since the Tang Dynasty, also called 唐诗. Archaic poem is a form of fixed format, usually have 5 or 7 characters in each line, without strict tonal patterns, or rhyme schemes. For example, 楚辞, there are 7 characters in each line. The Book of Songs, 楚辞, the songs of 乐府, poetry in the Han Dynasty, 汉赋, and folk songs in the northern and the southern dynasties, 南北朝民歌, are masterpieces of archaic poems. Modern poems refers to the innovation in classical poems, marked by the strict tonal patterns and rhyme schemes. The format of the modern poem is generally pentasyllabic or heptasyllabic quatrains. 绝句. Briefly speaking, each poem has 4 sentences and each sentence has 5 or 7 characters in a line. Besides that, is a pentasyllabic or heptasyllabic regulated verses. 律诗. Briefly speaking, each poem have 8 sentences and each sentences have 5 or 7 characters in a line. According to the content, it falls into the categories such as narrative poems, 叙事诗, lyric poems, 抒情诗, farewell poems, 送别诗, frontier poems, 边塞诗, idyll, 山水田园诗, history nostalgia poems, 咏史诗 memorial poems 悼亡诗 object describing poems 咏物诗 and military poems 军旅诗 and so on. Classical poetry is like a shining pearl of traditional Chinese culture. Tang poetry and Song Ci are two representatives of Chinese poetry. I will introduce them separately in the next video. Today, we have a brief overview of Chinese poetry. The following is a Mandarin time. Let's learn some Mandarin together.
The following is Mandarin time. Let's learn Mandarin together. Number 1. 诗歌诗歌诗歌 Today's topic of our video is about the Chinese poetry. So, how to speak the poetry in Mandarin? 诗歌 Next one. 古诗古诗 It means the classical Chinese poetry. 古诗 Please pay attention to the Chinese phonetic alphabets in red. 诗 means poetry. 古诗 Number 3. 民谣民谣民谣 Why I took these words in today's Mandarin learning? Because you should know the Chinese poetry derived from the work songs and ballads during the prehistorical times. 民谣 means ballads. 民谣 Number 4. 诗经诗经诗经 It means the book of songs. 诗经 The book of songs is the first poem collection including 305 poems from the early Western Zhou dynasty. 诗经 Okay, next one. 绝句绝句 It means the quatrain. 绝句 Number 6. 律诗律诗 It means the regulated verses. 律诗 Both the quatrains and the regulated verses have 5 or 7 Chinese characters in each sentence. 律诗 Number 7. 古体诗古体诗古体诗 It means the archaic poems. 古体诗 Also called pre-Tang poetry. 古体诗 The last one. 近体诗近体诗 It means the modern poems since the Tang dynasty. 近体诗 The archaic poems and the modern poems are two types of the Chinese poems. 我们今天普通话主要的学习内容呢，主要围绕着一个话题，就是古诗。Today, the Mandarin learning is on the topic of the Chinese poetry. So you should remember how to speak the poetry in Chinese language.
Welcome back. Actually, the Chinese poetry is difficult to understand because of the features of Chinese characters. I once took a course of the Western poetry appreciation. The two types of poetry are completely different. It's not easy to use other language to translate the Chinese poetry. For example, when you see this sentence, can you see the yellow river decanting from the sky? If you can speak Chinese, you will have a direct understanding and then translated it into 你能看见黄河从天上淌下来吗? So interesting to hear that. But in Chinese poetry, the proper translation is 君不见黄河之水天上来. So amazing, right? Chinese language is charming and has its unique romance. Alright, today's video is coming to an end. If you are interested in the Chinese poetry, you can read some books of it. Next time, I will introduce the Tang poetry and Songci in my video. So see you next time. Bye bye!